The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the sprawling ranch, its silence heavy as the air hung thick with unspoken words. Ilara stood by the weathered fence, her tattered dress fluttering in the soft breeze, the world around her alive, yet distant. She watched the horses gallop, their freedom a stark contrast to her own solitude. Silas emerged from the shadows of the barn, his broad shoulders burdened by invisible weights. He moved like a ghost, his eyes deep wells of untold stories and pain, searching for something beyond the horizon. She sensed his presence before she saw him. A silent understanding passed between them, a connection woven in the quiet. As dusk settled, the ranch transformed, revealing two lost souls orbiting around each other, bound by unvoiced truths. In their shared silence, a flicker of hope stirred, one that whispered of healing without touch, of unbroken bonds forged in the depths of solitude. The dimly lit barn smelled of hay and leather, shadows dancing as lanterns flickered to life. Ilara stood at the front, heart thudding in her chest like a caged bird. The harsh whispers of the auctioneer echoed, casting a long pall over the gathered crowd. She could feel the weight of their gazes, hungry and assessing, as if they were appraising livestock rather than a young woman. Her brother's face was a mask of indifference, but his eyes betrayed the urgency of desperation. They had talked about this moment, about sacrifice and survival, but she had never envisioned it would come to this, being sold like property. She felt her stomach twist, a knot of fear and betrayal tightening with every passing second. When the auctioneer called her name, the sound reverberated through the barn, a signal that initiated a parade of anxious whispers. Ilara stepped forward, her heart racing, each step heavier than the last. She glanced back at her brother, but that fleeting connection was snuffed out like a candle in the wind. His resolute gaze held no remorse, only the stubborn resolve of someone who had already made his choices. As the bidding commenced, her world began to blur, the faces blending into a single mass of ambition and greed. With every raised hand, she felt a piece of herself being bartered away, her identity slipping through their fingers, leaving behind only a hollow echo. Silas sat in the back, an observer cloaked in shadows. He had come to this auction out of curiosity, a brief respite from the weight of the world he had constructed on his ranch. The moment he saw Ilara step into the spotlight, the air thickened around him, the noise fading into a distant murmur. She was small, but her presence was anything but. Her eyes, bright and defiant, held a storm of emotions that mirrored the scars etched deep within him. Pain, resilience, and a flicker of hope merged in her gaze, igniting something dormant in his chest. He felt compelled to intervene, to rescue her from the fate being thrust upon her, even as he battled his trepidations about entangling himself in another person's turmoil. The bids escalated like a wildfire, each one pulling Ilara further into despair. A man with a thick mustache won her, raising the stakes with a smirk that sent chills down her spine. Silas felt an unexpected surge of anger, his heart pounding fiercely against the confines of his chest. He had built walls around himself, thick and impenetrable, but the sight of Ilara being claimed by a man who looked at her like she was a mere trophy shattered them. He could see the glimmer of fear in her eyes, and it was a reflection of the anguish he had known too well. The auctioneer's gavel struck down, sealing her fate, while Silas remained rooted to the spot, grappling with a sense of helplessness that gnawed at him. Ilara's world shifted abruptly. She was no longer her brother's responsibility, no longer part of a family that had betrayed her trust. As she was ushered away, the darkness of the barn closed in around her. The life she had known faded into a distant memory, replaced by the stark reality of her new existence. Fear clung to her like a second skin, and yet beneath it all lay an ember of defiance. She was determined not to let this man break her spirit, to claw back whatever sense of self she could grasp amid the chaos of her new life. Yet with each step away from the barn, She felt the distance to her past growing ever wider, the warmth of familial bonds getting colder with every heartbeat. Silas watched her leave, an unsettling weight pressing upon his chest. He was a rancher, resilient, solitary, shielded from the outside world by unyielding resolve. But there was something about Ilara that unsettled him, a profound sense of empathy igniting within, forcing him to reconsider his fortress of solitude. He lingered in the shadows, grappling with the tension that arose within him as she disappeared beyond the barn's doors. He had spent years burying his own wounds, convinced that vulnerability was a weakness. Yet, witnessing Ilara's plight broke through the layers he had encased himself in, pushing the boundaries of his emotional distance. As dusk settled, Silas's mind raced with conflicted thoughts. He could not rid himself of the image of her retreating figure, nor the palpable feeling of loss as she vanished from sight. He returned to his ranch. The vast field stretched before him like an expanse of unclaimed hopes and fleeting dreams. The ranch thrived under his meticulous care, but the loneliness clung to him like an unwelcome guest. How many more seasons could he endure this insufferable silence? Each night felt like an endless cycle of quiet despair. And yet here was Ilara, a girl whom he had never met until that evening, unsettling his equilibrium like a violent storm. The moon cast ghostly shadows across the property, illuminating the scars woven into the landscape, remnants of a past he could not escape. Silas had built walls not only around his ranch, but also around his heart, convinced that isolation was the only way to survive the wounds left by others. But with Ilara's presence lingering in his mind, he felt the foundations of his carefully constructed distance beginning to tremble. The realization that he could no longer exist in complete solitude clawed at him, pulling him toward an uncertain future that intertwined with hers. Yet fear held him back, tethering him to the very isolation he had hoped to escape. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting an amber glow across the sprawling expanse of the ranch as Ilara's worn-out sedan bumped along the gravel road. Dust swirled in the wake of her arrival, a cloud that danced in the fading light, shrouding her in a momentary haze. She turned off the engine, the vehicle sputtering to a standstill, and inhaled the crisp air, tinged with the scent of hay and earth. A far-off crow called, marking the end of another day, while silence enveloped the land like a heavy blanket. The ranch loomed before her, an austere silhouette against the vibrant sky, a symbol of her uncertain future. With shaking hands, Ilara pushed open the door and stepped onto the terrain that felt both alien and strangely familiar. Each step she took felt heavier than the last as the gravel crunched beneath her boots. She tugged at the hem of her jacket, trying to skew the chill that settled in her bones. It was a far cry from the warmth of her childhood home, a place that had once promised stability, but had dissipated into dust, leaving only echoes of rejection. She looked up at the ranch house, its wooden beams weathered by time, uninviting and yet a safe haven from the world that had cast her aside. Silas stood on the porch, his tall figure framed by the twilight, arms crossed over his denim-clad chest. His face was a mask of stoicism, eyes shadowed yet piercing, as if he were gauging the worth of a precious commodity about to be unveiled. Ilara's heart clenched at the sight of him. She had heard stories, marvelous in their exaggeration, of the rancher who had swept in and claimed the broken pieces of her life, but standing before him, she felt raw and vulnerable. Their meeting was akin to a collision of two worlds, one of privilege and the other of desperate yearning. "Welcome," Silas said, his voice deep, resonating with an edge of something unspoken. The word hung between them, and Ilara felt an invisible barrier separating their realities. She offered a timid nod, unable to form a reply that wouldn't betray the turmoil within her. Silas stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. The air inside was thick with the scent of wood and leather, a blend that hinted at solace, yet echoed with something unfulfilled. She took a cautious step inside the ranch house, and the door creaked shut behind her, sealing her in this new life. Days turned into nights in a quiet rhythm of chores and solitude. Ilara learned the routines of the ranch, the ebb and flow of tasks ranging from early morning feedings to late-night stargazing on the porch. Silas moved through the spaces like a ghost, rarely speaking, only breaking the silence to offer instructions or to address the needs of the animals. Ilara observed him often, noting the subtle tension in his posture, the way he carried the weight of unhealed wounds that ran deeper than the skin. She wondered what grief had forged the silence around him, the barriers he had built with invisible bricks. As days passed, an unspoken bond began to form, blossoming quietly in the absence of words. Ilara found herself seeking small moments to connect, lingering in the spaces where their lives intersected, a shared glance over the breakfast table or an accidental brush of arms while hanging laundry on the line. Each interaction was laced with a fragile hope, a promise that the scars they bore could slowly begin to mend in the light of each other's presence. She learned to read his silence, finding solace in the unvoiced understanding that lingered in the air around them. One evening a storm rolled in, dark clouds swallowing the horizon as lightning crackled and illuminated the sky in fleeting bursts. Ilara stood near the window, watching as raindrops pattered against the glass. Silas walked into the room, a silhouette against the tumultuous backdrop. For the first time, she witnessed the flicker of vulnerability that crossed his face, the storm reflecting in his stormy eyes, revealing the turmoil he grappled with inside. Without a word, he joined her at the window, their shoulders almost touching, a palpable warmth exchanged between them amidst the raging tempest outside. In that moment, Ilara felt an urge to reach out, to bridge the chasm that lay between them. But she hesitated, unsure if she had the right to touch the depths of his anguish. She turned her gaze back to the rain, letting her thoughts drift. Perhaps healing didn't always mean touching. Sometimes merely standing alongside someone in silence was enough. The storm raged on, yet within those walls a storm of a different kind was brewing. A shift, a stirring of unspoken emotions that both terrified and excited her. As the night deepened, the rain softened into a gentle rhythm, a lullaby that murmured secrets of hope. Ilara settled on the couch with a book, the words blurring as she looked up to find Silas still standing by the window. The shadows played tricks on her eyes, highlighting the rugged contours of his face, but all she could see was a man deeply etched by his battles. In that shared solitude, she felt a flicker of resolute determination. A promise to herself. She would not let his wounds remain untouched. Ilara tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear as she stepped out of the modest cabin, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. The wooden porch creaked beneath her weight, a familiar sound that had begun to feel like home. As the sun climbed above the horizon, casting a golden hue across the sprawling fields, she set to work, her hands skillfully tending to the garden she had planted weeks ago. The earth was her refuge, a place where the weight of rejection melted away with each weed she pulled. Yet there was a wound in her heart that hadn't healed, a constant reminder of the families that had looked at her and turned away. Inside the main house, Silas stood by the kitchen window, his silhouette framed against the morning light. He sipped his black coffee, his mind drifting like clouds across a summer sky. From his position, he watched Ilara move gracefully, the way she knelt and worked with tender intent. There was something about her resilience that intrigued him, something that stirred emotions he had long buried beneath layers of stoicism. Silas had built walls around his heart, but with each passing day, those walls felt less like armor and more like a cage. As Ilara poured water onto her plants, Silas found himself stepping outside, compelled by a force he couldn't quite name. He approached her slowly, his boots crunching on gravel, breaking the morning silence. Ilara turned at the sound, her green eyes wide with surprise. There was a moment, suspended in time, where neither spoke. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a shared burden of loneliness that no one else could comprehend. Silas cleared his throat, breaking the spell, and offered a genuine smile. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice gruff yet soft, like the first hint of spring in a long winter. Ilara hesitated, then nodded, grateful yet wary. The intimacy of this simple exchange felt laden with uncharted territory, shadows of previous rejections flickering through her mind. She was healed but not whole, a patchwork of scars and strength, and Silas seemed to hold the same secrets in his silenced gaze. As days turned into weeks, they settled into a routine that painted the rhythm of their lives. Mornings began with shared coffee, their conversations peppered with laughter and moments of silence, punctuated by the distant sound of cows lowing in the pastures. They worked side by side, planting seeds of crops and conversations, trading stories that revealed glimpses of their pasts. Silas spoke of loneliness and the heavy burden of expectations, while Ilara shared tales of her family's rejection and the quiet strength she found within herself. Yet with every shared laugh, Ilara felt an undercurrent of tension swirl between them. There were times when Silas would look at her, a hunger in his eyes that spoke of an unfulfilled desire, a longing for connection. It drew her in and pushed her away in equal measure. The emotional friction between them crackled like a summer storm building on the horizon. She wanted to reach out, but her heart was weary, bruised from the betrayal she had endured. It terrified her to trust again. One evening, as the sky turned from blue to deep indigo, they sat under the stars, the vastness of the universe stretching above them. Silas reached for a piece of wood to keep the fire crackling, and in that moment, a silence fell upon them. Ilara sensed the weight of his gaze, heavy with unasked questions. She turned her head slightly to meet his eyes, and the air felt charged, thick with possibilities. Would he be the one to breach that fragile barrier she had erected around her heart? "What if," he began cautiously, "what if we're both just two people trying to find our place?" Ilara felt her heart race at the vulnerability in his tone. She saw the intricate tapestry of his soul stitched together with both hope and fear. In that moment, she wanted to tell him everything, the ache she carried, the dreams that flickered like candles on the verge of being extinguished. Instead, the words tangled in her throat, the fear of what might come if she let him in, rumbling like the thunder of a distant storm. As they sat there, under the weight of unspoken truths, Ilara understood that healing wasn't just about time or tending to what hurt. It was also about daring to embrace the unknown, to lean into the potential for something beautiful amidst the chaos. She was ready to confront her fears, but the question lingered. Was Silas ready to welcome her in, to allow their wounds to intertwine in the hope of creating something new? The cool breeze swept through the sprawling ranch, ruffling the edges of Ilara's worn sweater. She stood on the porch, watching the sunset dip behind the hills like a golden coin sinking into a deep pocket of blue. Silas was inside, the sound of his boots thudding against the wooden floor, echoing softly in the silence that enveloped them. Despite the laughter of the surrounding wildlife, an unshakable weight hung in the air between them. It had been weeks since Silas had brought her here, away from the whispers of rejection that clung to her like a shadow. He had taken her in when no one else would, sheltering her from the storm of her past. Yet in the quiet moments, when the night crept in like an unwelcome guest, the unspoken words and unshed tears formed a barrier that felt insurmountable. She had been healing in his presence, feeling the warmth of his kindness, but the past chased her like a relentless specter. Inside, Silas sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped tightly together, the wood grain pressing into his palms. He tried to focus on the bills sprawled before him, but the tension in his chest was too consuming. Every fleeting thought of Ilara brought with it a jarring reminder of the secrets he kept hidden, the lavish life he had left behind, the guilt of possessing wealth while she had known such hardship. He excelled at concealing his wounds, but the longer she stayed, the deeper he feared those wounds would bleed. Ilara stepped inside, her eyes searching his face for a glimpse of truth hidden behind his stoic demeanor. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly, her voice a soft tremor. The question echoed in the room, and Silas glanced up, caught between the urge to confide and the wall he had built around his heart. The warmth of her concern wrapped around him, almost suffocating. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had long avoided, and for a moment the weight became unbearable. "Nothing," he replied, the lies slipping past his lips almost too easily. But Ilara saw through him, the way he shifted in his chair, the slight furrow in his brow. He was a fortress, strong and unyielding, yet so painfully alone. She had once felt that loneliness too, a part of her life that lingered in the shadows. But amidst her own struggles, Silas had offered solace. The irony of their situation gnawed at her. She who had been rejected found a home, while he bore the burden of wealth like a weight pulling him under. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine," she said, her voice steadier than her heart. Tears threatened to spill, and she blinked them back, resolute. "I feel it, Silas. You're fighting something, and I wish you'd let me in." His silence struck like a chord, reverberating in the fragile fabric of their burgeoning bond. The pain in her chest swelled, mixing with a raw yearning to break down the walls he kept so carefully in place. Silas looked away, the flickering light from the nearby lamp dancing across his features. It felt as though he was standing at the edge of a precipice, the depths below black and daunting. "I didn't choose this life," he finally confessed, his voice scraping through the stillness like a branch against a window. "I built this ranch to escape, to be someone different, but I'm still just a man hiding behind a name, pretending I'm someone worth loving." Ilara's heart twisted painfully in her chest. The truth of his confession washed over her like a sudden rain, and she took a step closer, her eyes wide with understanding. Silas, the wealthy rancher, was just as lost as she had been, a man trapped in a prison of expectations built from golden bars. "You're worth loving, Silas. You've shown me kindness and warmth when it felt like no one ever would again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it resonated with the gravity of her words. With a deep inhale, Silas met her gaze, the vulnerability in his own eyes mirroring her openness. "But I don't know how to stop running," he admitted, the war within himself spilling into the space between them. Ilara could see the storm brewing in his heart, and for the first time, the distance that had felt so infinite shrank just enough to breathe hope into her lungs. She took another step forward, a gentle courage rising within her as they stood, no longer just a rancher and a girl, but two souls caught in a dance of healing together. Ilara stood on the porch of the old farmhouse, a weathered wood that creaked softly under her weight. The sunset spilled golden hues across the sky, igniting the horizon in vibrant oranges and deep purples. She fixed her gaze on the sprawling fields, the tall grass swaying in gentle waves, whispering secrets only the wind understood. It was her sanctuary now, a realm where past rejections faded into distant echoes and hope seemed to blossom anew amidst the rubble of her former life. Silas moved behind her, his silhouette outlined against the waning light. He had spent the day mending fences, his body aching from the labor, yet he felt an unease deeper than physical fatigue. The scars running across his heart were fresh, remnants of a loss he thought would linger forever. But lately, something had shifted within the confines of his guarded world, a flicker of warmth in the chill of his isolation. He approached Ilara cautiously, knowing that even the smallest touch of connection between them could ignite a spark, both beautiful and terrifying. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he ventured, breaking the silence that hung heavily between them. His voice was steady, yet uncharacteristically soft. The vulnerability in his tone mirrored the essence of the moment, both unsteady and profound. Ilara turned slightly, her expression revealing a sincerity he had not seen from anyone in years. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a longing that spoke to the very core of him, unraveling the tightly woven barriers he had built around his heart. "It is," Ilara replied, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile connection that was blooming. She looked back at the horizon, where colors blended seamlessly, and her heart ached for the life she feared she might never fully claim. "It feels like a promise, doesn't it? Like everything can change in an instant." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of shared dreams and unspoken desires, whispering to Silas in ways that transcended language. Silas stepped closer, the distance between them closing as the warmth of her presence enveloped him. A dive into vulnerability. He felt it pulse like a heartbeat in the air. "Yeah," he said, almost reluctantly, as if admitting that hope was still a part of him felt dangerous, like everything could be better than we imagined. He couldn't recall the last time he had allowed himself to ponder such things, let alone share them with anyone. Yet, standing near Ilara, he felt something shift. It was an invitation, a silent call to weave their scars together, to heal in ways neither had thought possible. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She felt exposed, yet profoundly seen. There was an understanding in Silas's gaze, a reflection of her own fears and dreams. With a trembling hand, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the weathered railing of the porch, tracing its rough edges. "We're just two broken souls, Silas," she murmured, the honesty in her voice wrapping around him like a warm embrace. "But maybe together we can find a way to heal." The distance between them seemed to evaporate as Silas contemplated her words. His pulse quickened. He could sense the gravity of this moment, a subtle connection unfolding like the petals of a blooming flower. He reached out tentatively, his fingers grazing the splintered wood where Ilara had touched, imagining her warmth resonating there. "Maybe we can," he replied, the tension between past wounds and the promise of a shared future crackling in the air. Ilara noticed the way his eyes softened, a flicker of something deeper illuminating the shadows. A newfound understanding passed between them, a silent promise that their healing paths could intertwine without words or touch, as if their souls were finding a rhythm that spoke of empathy, of shared scars and embers of hope. She smiled, a small yet potent expression that felt like the first light of dawn breaking through the darkest of nights. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced around them, Ilara and Silas remained transfixed in their shared silence, anchored by an unspoken bond. In that fleeting moment, they were not two individuals burdened by their past, but rather two wounded souls finding solace in the possibility of a tomorrow that was bursting with untold stories and the promise of healing. A journey they would embark on together, hand in hand, without ever needing to touch. Ilara stood at the edge of the sprawling ranch, the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the land she had come to call home. She inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of wildflowers mixed with the earthy aroma of tilled soil. Yet, despite the beauty surrounding her, a tempest brewed within. It was a daily battle, teetering on the edge of overwhelming desire and crippling fear. She wanted to speak, to share her thoughts and feelings, yet silence clung to her like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. Silas moved through the fields, his silhouette framed by the dying light. He was a man of few words, a presence that offered comfort, if only through his quiet resolve. Ilara watched him, her heart aching with unspoken words. She had become accustomed to the stillness that wrapped around them, a cocoon that both sheltered and isolated. But there were moments, brief flickers of courage, when she yearned to break free from the silence, to express the gratitude and admiration that welled inside her like a raging river. She remembered the first time he had cared for her wounds, tending to her with a gentleness she had never imagined possible. His hands had moved deftly, wrapping her bruises with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the harshness of her past. But as he healed her physically, She had felt the weight of her unvoiced thoughts pressing down like a stone. How could she thank him when her voice was buried under layers of fear? She ached to tell him how deeply his kindness had touched her, yet the words remained trapped in the recesses of her mind. Ilara's resolve wavered as she stared at Silas, the man who had bought her from the rejection of 5 families, the man who had seen her worth in a sea of dismissals. She felt an insatiable urge to connect, to bridge the chasm of silence that enveloped them. Each glance he cast her way ignited a flicker of hope, urging her to take a leap of faith. Yet doubt clawed at her mind, whispering that her voice was unworthy, that it would crumble under the weight of his expectations. In a quiet moment, she ventured closer, her breath hitching as she prepared herself for what she had longed to say. Silas turned, meeting her gaze with those deep, understanding eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. Her heart raced, thundering in her chest, drowning out the cacophony of doubt. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, an unspoken promise that there was safety in his presence. It was now or never. The thought echoed in her mind with each rapid heartbeat. Silas. The word barely escaped her lips, trembling like a fragile leaf in the wind. She paused, feeling the weight of the moment settle around them, charged with something electric. She had spoken. The sound lingered in the air, reverberating with the potential of so much more. Would he see this as a triumph or falter under the weight of her hesitation? The fear of failing still gripped her, yet there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere, a sense of impending release. Silas took a step closer, a soft smile breaking across his features, encouraging her in a way his silence never could. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," he murmured. But in that instant, the gentle reassurance ignited her resolve. It was as if the dam inside her had cracked, allowing a stream of emotions to surge forth. She could feel her heart swell with the desire to finally share her truth. She no longer felt like a ghost in the shadows. She yearned to step into the light. "I want to..." The words poured out with a rush as she fought to find the right ones. "I want to thank you for everything, for seeing me." Each word felt like a stone lifted from her chest, the acknowledgement of her existence shimmering into reality. "I've never had someone believe in me like you do." Her voice trembled, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was a mixture of vulnerability and strength, finally embracing the connection she so desperately craved. Silas's eyes softened, his smile widening with understanding. "You're not alone, Ilara. You never were." In that moment, the gap between them bridged, an invisible thread forged from honesty and shared experiences. The silence that once suffocated them had transformed into a sanctuary, a space where words could breathe and flourish. Ilara felt the last remnants of her resistance dissolve, replaced by the warmth of acceptance, healing her wounds without the need for touch. Ilara stood at the edge of the sprawling meadow, her heart pounding in her chest like a wild drum. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the landscape, but her focus was solely on Silas. He stood a few feet away, his once familiar silhouette now wrapped in shadows of uncertainty and pain. She could see the tension etched into the lines of his face, a mixture of stubborn pride and deep-seated vulnerability. The air between them crackled with the weight of unsaid words, memories of laughter scattered like leaves in the wind. Days turned into weeks at the ranch, and yet the unspoken bond between them felt like a secret, a hidden treasure buried beneath the layers of their pasts. Ilara had helped Silas in ways he couldn't even articulate. Her presence alone seemed to siphon away the storm clouds that raged in his heart. She'd watched him wrestle with his demons, guilt from lost opportunities, grief from wounds that ran deeper than the skin. Each night, when the stars emerged, it was as if they held their breath, waiting for the moment Ilara would break the silence that surrounded them. With every shared glance, with every brush of hands while tending to the animals, Ilara felt an unshakable urge to reach out to him. She wanted to tell him that healing wasn't just a linear path. It was messy and complicated, yet beautiful in its own right. But words had always escaped her in moments when it mattered most. Instead, she watched as the man before her struggled with the weight of his past, feeling both a fierce desire to save him and an ache of helplessness that threatened to consume her. "Why do you keep fighting it?" Elara finally whispered, the question tumbling from her lips like a fragile bird taking flight. Silas turned to her, surprise and something softer flickering in his eyes. They stood there, surrounded by tall grasses dancing in the evening breeze, two souls intertwined, but still so far from understanding one another. She searched for the resolve within herself, refusing to let fear guide her any longer. "You don't have to shoulder this alone, Silas." His breath hitched at the sound of his name, reverberating in the space between them like an incantation. There was something about the quiet urgency in her voice that drew him in, a spark igniting behind the clouds of his sorrow. Silas could feel the walls he had built around his heart tremble, shifting under the intensity of Elara's gaze. The way she said his name was a gentle reminder of the warmth that still lingered beneath his scars. Lightning in a storm. He wanted to reach out, to run into her embrace, but fear held him captive. As she took a step closer, the world faded away. The ranch, the horses, the barn, the fields, everything dissolved until only they remained. The tension in Silas's shoulders unraveled, and he found himself vulnerable under the glow of her unwavering faith. "I'm broken, Elara," he confessed, the words spilling out like a confession in a dimly lit chapel. "I don't know how to fix it." There was pain, but within it, a flicker of hope ignited. Silas had never allowed anyone to see him like this, stripped bare of all pretenses, and it terrified him. "I don't want you to fix it," Elara replied softly, her own heart racing. "I want you to be honest with yourself." Her voice wove around him, cocooning him in warmth, like a mother cradling her child. "It's okay to hurt and to ask for help. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." The walls he had erected began to crumble, one timid brick at a time, as he felt her unyielding belief wrap around him like a protective cloak. "Then, what do I do?" Silas's voice was barely a whisper, but it held the weight of mountains. Elara took a breath, drawing courage from the depths of her own healing journey. She stepped closer still, until their breaths mingled in the evening air, and it felt like the world turned on its axis. "You learn to trust again," she said, her heart swelling with emotion. "You learn to say my name, not just as a name, but as a promise." "Elara," Silas breathed, finally embracing the reality that had echoed in his heart for so long. The sound of her name was a balm to his wounds, a reminder that they were not alone in their struggles. It was the moment of surrender they both craved, wrapped in the beauty of vulnerability. Elara's eyes shone with unshed tears, the sun dipping below the horizon, illuminating a path toward healing they would walk together. In that profound silence broken by his voice, they found their future, intertwined, no longer a burden, but a partnership forged in the fires of their shared wounds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, its last rays spilled golden light across the vast expanse of the ranch, illuminating the wildflowers that danced in the gentle breeze. Elara knelt among them, fingers brushing the petals, each touch a silent promise of healing. Silas stood a few paces away, his silhouette framed against the fading light, the weight of his past clutching at his chest like a storm cloud. She looked up, her gaze meeting his, and in that moment the world faded into a hush. The whispers of the wind seemed to echo their unspoken understanding. He stepped forward, the distance between them shrinking as if drawn by an invisible thread, woven from shared scars and quiet acceptance. Silas lowered himself to her side, the earth cool beneath them, and together they sat, the blossoms of vibrant tapestry around them. Without a word, he extended his hand, palm open, and she placed hers within it, fingers intertwining like roots beneath the surface. The sun slipped away, leaving only twilight, yet in the shadows they found light. Two souls entwined in silence. They watched as the stars blinked awake, each one a testament to their unbreakable bond, an unspoken vow of healing in the moonlit night.